Once upon a time in the red clay hills of Georgia, in the year 1852, the plantation known as Willow Bend stretched across thousands of acres like a living monument to one man's wealth and another man's chains. Elias Hawthorne, at 38 years of age, ruled it all with the quiet confidence of someone who had never known doubt. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sharp blue eyes and a neatly trimmed beard that framed a face hardened by years under the southern sun, he was the picture of a gentleman planter. He rose each morning before the roosters, mounted his black stallion named Thunder, and rode the endless rows of cotton while the dew still clung to the bolls. 200 enslaved men, women, and children toiled from can't see in the morning to can't see at night, their backs bent, their hands raw, their songs rising low and mournful when the overseers were out of earshot. Elias had inherited Willow Bend from his father at 21. The old man had built the place from wilderness with the labor of the first generation brought up from the Carolinas. Strong men and women whose names Elias never bothered to learn beyond the tallies in his ledgers. He never questioned the order of things. The Bible spoke of servants and masters. The law of Georgia protected his property rights. Profit flowed like the Chattahoochee River after spring rains. He was not cruel by the brutal standards of his neighbors. He rarely raised the whip himself, leaving that to the 2 white overseers who lived in the small house by the gin. Yet he was absolute. Runaways were hunted down with dogs and returned in chains. Families were separated without a second thought when debts needed paying or when a field hand grew too old to be useful. Children learned before they could walk that their lives, their bodies, their very breath belonged to the big white house with its wide porches, Greek columns, and crystal chandeliers that sparkled like captured stars. The quarters lay a half-mile behind the mansion, a cluster of rough log cabins with dirt floors, leaky roofs, and chimneys that smoked only when the wind allowed. At night, the air carried the low hum of spirituals, the cries of hungry babies, the occasional crack of a lash when someone was caught resting too long. Elias heard none of it from his bedroom window. He dined on silver plates, slept on goose feather mattresses, and counted his bales each season with the satisfaction of a man who believed God himself had ordained the arrangement. His wife, Margaret, had died in childbirth 5 years earlier, leaving him with one daughter, little Caroline, who was now 9 and spent her days with a tutor learning French and piano. Elias loved the child fiercely, yet even she was raised to see the dark faces in the fields as background scenery, no more real than the horses or the hounds. He told himself he was a good master. He fed them cornmeal and pork belly on Sundays. He allowed Christmas dances. He never sold a mother away from a child under 10, unless the price was right. Then came the night that shattered everything. It was the second week of July, the height of the picking season. The air hung thick and wet, heavy with the sweet rot smell of open cotton bolls. The fields shimmered white under a merciless sun by day and turned silver under the moon at night. Elias had retired early after a long evening tallying the latest harvest figures in his study, the ledgers showing another record year. Around midnight, the sky split open with a fury rarely seen even in Georgia storms. Thunder rolled like cannon fire across the hills. Lightning danced in jagged veins, turning night to blinding day. Rain came in sheets, pounding the tin roofs of the quarters like angry fists. Suddenly, a tremendous crack echoed across the plantation, louder than any thunder. The ancient oak that stood sentinel behind the slave quarters, the one the old folks called the witness tree because it had stood there longer than any living soul, took a direct hit. The bolt struck the massive trunk dead center, splitting it down the middle with a sound like the world breaking. A huge burning branch, thick as a man's waist and 20 feet long, tore free and crashed downward into the row of cabins. Screams pierced the storm. Elias bolted upright in bed, heart slamming against his ribs. He pulled on boots and a coat, grabbed a lantern, and ran barefoot through the driving rain toward the quarters. By the time he arrived, chaos reigned. Flames licked at the roof of cabin number 7. Women and children scrambled through the mud, clutching babies and the few possessions they owned. Men were already fighting the fire with buckets passed hand to hand from the well, their bare feet slipping in the red clay. Then Elias saw it. Young Jonah, 17 years old, son of field hand Amara and a father sold south 3 winters earlier, lay pinned beneath the blazing branch. The heavy limb had fallen across his left leg, trapping him against the wet ground. His trousers were already smoking. The fire seared his flesh with a sickening hiss. Jonah screamed in raw agony, his voice rising above the storm. 2 older men, Isaiah and Big Levi, were desperately trying to lift the branch, but the wood was too heavy and the flames too fierce. Elias dropped the lantern into the mud. Without thinking, he threw himself forward. "Move aside!" he shouted. The first time in his life he had ever spoken directly to them in crisis. He grabbed the burning branch with his bare hands. Pain exploded up his arms as blisters rose instantly, but he did not let go. Together with Isaiah and Big Levi, they heaved. Muscles straining, faces lit by fire and lightning, they rolled the limb off Jonah's leg. The boy collapsed into his mother's arms. Amara wailed as she saw the charred, blackened skin where the fire had eaten through cloth and flesh. While the others beat out the last flames on the cabin roof with wet sacks, Elias stood motionless in the pouring rain. The water streamed down his face, mixing with sweat and the sting of his burned palms. He stared at Jonah, really stared. The boy's eyes, wide with shock and pain, met his for one brief, terrible moment. In that gaze, Elias saw not boy, not property, not another line in a ledger. He saw a young man who had dreams of learning to read, who had once carved a wooden whistle for his little sister, who had a mother who loved him more than life itself, and a future that had been stolen before it began. The rain finally extinguished the last embers. The crowd fell silent, every face turned toward the master, waiting for the orders that always followed trouble. Perhaps a whipping for carelessness, perhaps the sale of someone to cover repairs. But Elias said nothing. His hands hung at his sides, raw and bleeding. He turned slowly and walked back toward the big house alone, the storm still raging around him. That night Elias did not sleep. He sat in his study with every ledger open before him on the mahogany desk. The numbers swam like accusations in the lamplight. Every dollar earned from those white fields, every bolt of cloth in Caroline's dresses, every crystal glass from which he drank his brandy, had been paid for in blood, sweat, and stolen years. He thought of Jonah's scream. He thought of the hundreds of similar screams he had never allowed himself to hear. He thought of Amara's wail. He thought of his own daughter sleeping peacefully upstairs, never once wondering why the children in the quarters had no shoes. By the time the first gray light crept through the windows, Elias Hawthorne was shaking. Tears he had not shed since childhood streaked his face. For the first time in 38 years he truly saw, and he knew, with a clarity that terrified him, that he could never unsee again. At first light, Elias walked alone to the quarters. No overseer rode with him. No whip hung at his belt. The storm had passed, leaving the air cool and clean, the ground slick with red mud that sucked at his boots. Smoke still drifted from the charred cabin. People gathered in the open space between the rows, men holding tools they had not yet dared to set down, women cradling children, elders leaning on sticks. Every face turned toward him with the wary stillness of people who had learned long ago that sudden attention from the big house rarely brought good. Elias stopped 10 paces from the nearest cabin. He removed his hat, something no master had ever done before them. The gesture hung in the morning air like a foreign language. "I have been blind," he said. His voice carried clear and low, without the usual command tone. "Last night the Lord, or perhaps it was only a dying boy, opened my eyes. I cannot undo the years I have taken from you. I cannot give back the children sold, the backs broken, the nights stolen. But from this day forward, no one on Willow Bend works without pay. You are free to leave or stay. If you stay, you will be paid a fair wage, same as any hired hand in Atlanta or Savannah. And together, we are going to build something that will outlive my shame." Silence answered him first. Then a murmur rippled through the crowd like wind through dry corn. Some looked at their neighbors as if waiting for the trap to spring. Others stared at the ground, tears cutting tracks through the dust on their cheeks. A few young men shifted their weight, ready to run if this proved another cruel jest. Amara stepped forward, Jonah supported between her and Big Levi. The boy's leg was wrapped in clean rags, but the smell of burned salve and charred flesh still clung to him. Amara's eyes, red-rimmed, fierce, locked on Elias. "You speak true?" she asked. "No, sir. No, massa. Just the plain question of one human being to another." Elias met her gaze without flinching. "I do." "Then prove it," she said. "Right now, give us papers, give us coin, let us see if your word holds weight." Elias nodded once. He turned and walked back to the big house. The crowd watched in stunned quiet as he disappeared inside. Minutes later, he returned carrying a small wooden box, the one he kept locked in his study for important documents. He set it on an overturned crate that served as a makeshift table. Inside lay blank manumission papers he had purchased years earlier but never used, ink, quill, and a small leather pouch heavy with gold and silver coins, his personal reserve for emergencies. He opened the pouch and poured the contents onto the crate. Coins glinted in the morning sun. "Every soul here who wishes to leave may take freedom papers and enough coin for passage north or west, whatever road you choose. Those who stay will receive wages starting today. 10 cents a day for field work, 15 for skilled labor, carpentry, blacksmithing, sewing. Women who tend children or cook will be paid the same. No more beatings, no more sales, no more separating families." He dipped the quill, signed the first paper with his full name, then pushed it toward Amara. "Start with Jonah," he said. "He should not have to wait." Amara took the paper with trembling fingers. She read the words slowly: freedom, manumission, immediate effect. Then she pressed it to her chest and looked at her son. Jonah, pale and sweating from pain, managed a small, crooked smile. Others stepped forward then, one by one. Some took papers and coins and walked away without a backward glance. 23 left that morning, young men mostly, heading toward the railroad lines or the rumored safe houses along the river. The rest stayed, uncertain but unwilling to abandon the only home they had ever known without seeing whether the promise held. Elias spent the rest of the day at the crate, writing papers, counting out wages, answering questions. By dusk, his hands ached worse than the burns, but he did not stop. When the last person had been paid or freed, he stood alone in the empty quarters yard. The witness tree still smoldered, a blackened scar against the sky. He looked up at the big house on the hill, its white columns glowing faintly in the twilight, and felt something shift inside his chest. Not relief, not absolution, just the beginning of a long, hard reckoning. The next morning he called the remaining people to the yard again. This time he brought maps, crude sketches of the plantation boundaries, and a surveyor's chain. "We will sell half the land," he told them. The western fields, the ones hardest to reach. "The money will buy lumber, glass, tools, seed, livestock. We will build houses, real houses with plank floors, glass windows, brick chimneys. Each family will have its own plot for a garden. We will build a school, a church that belongs to you, not to me. A store where you can buy what you need with the money you earn. And we will call this place New Dawn." The name came from an old woman named Sister Grace, who had been on the plantation since Elias's grandfather's time. She spoke it quietly, but the words carried. "New dawn," she repeated, "because the old night is passing." They voted on it that same hour, hands raised, voices calling out. No one dissented. New dawn, it would be. Elias sold the western acres within the week to 2 neighboring planters who thought he had gone mad from grief or fever. They laughed behind his back, called him the ruined Hawthorne. But the gold that changed hands was real. With it came wagons loaded with pine boards, window panes wrapped in straw, iron nails in barrels, plows, seed corn, and a small herd of milk cows. The building began immediately. Men who had once raised the big house under threat of lash now raised their own cabins with willing hands. Elias worked beside them, shirt sleeves rolled, back bent under the same sun. He learned their names properly for the first time. Isaiah the blacksmith, Ruth the seamstress, Levi the storyteller, Grace the healer. He listened when they spoke of children sold away, of nights spent hiding food from overseers, of prayers whispered in secret. He did not apologize in grand speeches. He simply stayed, hammered nails, mixed mortar, carried lumber until his shoulders burned. Wages were paid every Friday at dusk beneath the surviving half of the witness tree. Elias sat at a rough table with a ledger and a strongbox. Each person stepped forward, received their envelope, coins counted out exactly, and signed or made their mark beside their name. No one was shorted. No one was favored. When the money ran thin in the early months, Elias sold silver from the big house to make payroll. He and Caroline ate simpler meals. The crystal chandelier was replaced with oil lamps. Word spread slowly at first, then faster. Whispers traveled along the hidden roads the enslaved used to pass news. A plantation in Georgia, where the master paid wages, signed freedom papers, built houses with glass windows. Runaways began arriving at night, tired, hungry, eyes wide with disbelief. Elias never turned one away. He gave them a cabin, work if they wanted it, wages from the first day. The village grew. By the end of the first year, 30 new cabins stood in neat rows along what had once been cotton furrows. Each had a porch, a garden plot already turned, and a chimney that drew clean. Children who had never owned a pair of shoes now ran barefoot on plank floors. A small school opened in one of the larger cabins. Ruth taught the alphabet using charcoal on scavenged boards. A church rose next. Simple pine walls, but with real pews and a bell that rang on Sunday mornings for people who finally owned their own time. Elias watched it all from the porch of the big house, which now felt too large, too empty. Caroline, growing taller every season, asked him once why the dark faces no longer bowed when they passed. Because they are not property anymore, he told her. They are neighbors. She thought about that for a long time before nodding. The second spring brought the grist mill. Isaiah designed it, using the creek that ran through the northern edge of the remaining land. Men dug the race, laid the foundation stones, hoisted the great wheel. When it first turned and ground corn into meal, the whole village gathered to watch. Someone started a song, low at first, then rising, and soon every voice joined. Elias stood at the back, hat in hand, listening to music he had once pretended not to hear. That night, around the communal fire in the new square, Jonah, now walking without a limp, though the scars remained, raised a tin cup of cider. "To new dawn," he said. The crowd echoed it back, louder each time. Elias did not join the toast. He simply watched the flames, feeling the weight of every year he could never repay, and the small, hard beginning of something better. The second year tested them all. Winter came early and hard, the kind of cold that seeped into bones and made the new plank floors creak underfoot. The grist mill wheel froze solid for weeks. The creek iced over so thick a man could walk across it. Food stores dwindled faster than anyone expected. Too many mouths now, too many new arrivals slipping in under cover of darkness. Elias sold the last of his mother's silver candlesticks in Macon to buy cornmeal and salt pork. Caroline learned to knead dough beside Ruth and Grace, her small hands dusted white, her French lessons forgotten for the season. Yet no one starved. When a family ran short, neighbors brought what they could: sweet potatoes from a garden, eggs from a hen that had started laying again, a rabbit snared in the woods. Elias ate the same meals everyone else did: cornbread, greens boiled with a scrap of fatback, weak coffee stretched with chicory. He moved out of the big house entirely that December, giving the mansion over to a growing family of runaways: 8 children, their parents, 2 grandparents, who had arrived with nothing but the clothes on their backs. He took a small cabin at the edge of the village, the same size as everyone else's, with 1 room, a loft, and a fireplace that smoked when the wind blew wrong. The people noticed. They began calling him Elias instead of Mr. Hawthorne. Some still slipped and said, "Massa," then caught themselves and laughed awkwardly. Elias never corrected them. He simply answered to whatever name came. Spring brought thaw and trouble. Word of new dawn had spread farther than Elias anticipated. Bounty hunters started riding the back roads, asking questions in crossroads stores about that crazy Hawthorne place where niggers get paid. One night in March, 3 armed men rode up to the northern fence line just after moonrise. They carried torches and rifles, shouting for the runaways to come out or be dragged back in chains. The village dogs set up a furious barking. Lanterns appeared in cabin windows. Men grabbed axes and pitchforks. Women hid children under beds. Elias stepped out of his cabin barefoot, coat thrown over his nightshirt, holding only a lantern. He walked straight toward the fence. "Gentlemen," he called, voice steady, "this is private property. You are trespassing." One of the riders, a scar-faced man with a Georgia militia badge, spat into the dirt. "We got warrants for 6 runaways holed up here. Hand 'em over, Hawthorne, or we burn this nigger heaven to the ground." Elias raised the lantern higher. Behind him, shadows moved. Isaiah with his hammer, Big Levi with a shotgun he had kept hidden for years, Jonah limping forward with a stout oak staff. More men and women gathered, silent but armed with whatever they could find: hoes, sickles, kitchen knives. "You have no warrants here," Elias said. "These people are free, paid workers on my land. I have their papers, signed and witnessed. Ride away now, and no one gets hurt." The scar-faced man laughed. "You gone soft in the head, Hawthorne. Law says property is property." Elias took 1 step closer to the fence. "The law also says a man can defend his home, and this is home now for all of us." A long moment stretched. The riders shifted in their saddles, glancing at the growing line of armed shadows behind Elias. One muttered something about not worth dying over Yankee nonsense. The scar-faced man glared longest, then wheeled his horse. "This ain't over," he snarled. "We'll be back with the sheriff." They rode off into the dark. No shots were fired. No blood spilled. The next morning, the village held its first town meeting under the half of the witness tree that still stood. Chairs were brought from cabins. Children sat on the ground. Elias spoke first. "They'll come again," he said. "Maybe with badges, maybe with a mob. We need to decide what we do when that day comes." Isaiah stood. "We fight. This is our home now." Ruth shook her head. "Fighting brings soldiers. Soldiers bring death." Jonah leaned on his staff. "We build. We make this place so strong they can't tear it down without the whole county knowing. We write letters to newspapers up north. We get eyes on us. Let the world see what happens if they try." Voices rose. Some for hiding, some for arming, some for sending word to abolitionists in Atlanta and Philadelphia. In the end, they voted: fortify quietly, keep watch at night, send trusted runners north with letters describing new dawn and asking for protection under whatever fragile laws still existed. Elias promised to write to his cousin in Boston, a lawyer with connections in Congress. From that day forward, 2 men patrolled the perimeter each night. Rifles were cleaned and loaded but kept out of sight. Children were taught to run to the woods at the first sound of hooves. Yet life continued. The school grew. Caroline began helping Ruth teach the youngest ones their letters. The store opened in a new cabin. Shelves stocked with flour, sugar, cloth, nails, all sold at cost. People bought what they needed with their wages, proud to count out coins they had earned themselves. Summer brought the first real harvest under the new system. Cotton still grew on the remaining fields, not as much as before, but enough. When the bales were pressed and sold in Macon, Elias divided the profit equally after expenses. Each worker received a share. Some bought land scrip from the state. Others saved for tools or livestock. A few sent money north to kin still in bondage, hoping one day to buy their freedom. Elias watched from the porch of his small cabin as families gathered in the square that evening, counting their shares, laughing, planning. Caroline sat beside him on the steps, her head on his shoulder. "Papa," she said softly, "are we poor now?" He smiled, the first real smile in years. "No, darling, we're rich. We just don't own people anymore." That night, around the communal fire, someone started the old song, the one they used to sing in secret. This time they sang it loud, voices rising clear under the stars. Elias listened from the shadows, tears on his cheeks, knowing he would never be forgiven entirely, but grateful every day for the chance to try. The third year dawned with new hope and new danger. The third year dawned with new hope and new danger. By now, New Dawn had grown to nearly 80 families. New cabins lined 3 wide streets that the people themselves had named: Freedom Lane, Witness Road, and Dawn Square. Gardens burst with beans, squash, and okra. Chickens scratched in every yard. The grist mill turned steadily, grinding not only corn but wheat bought from a sympathetic farmer upriver. The schoolhouse had its own bell now, cast from melted wagon wheels and church scraps. It rang each morning at 7, calling children who no longer feared the lash. Ruth and Caroline taught side by side, the white girl and the black woman sharing slates and laughter as if the old world had never existed. Elias had learned to read the land differently. He walked the remaining fields at dawn with Jonah and Isaiah, planning crop rotation, testing soil, talking about drainage ditches the way other men once talked about cotton prices. He no longer rode Thunder. The stallion had been sold to pay for more window glass. Instead, he walked, boots caked in the same red clay that stained everyone else's. His hands, once soft from ledgers, were now calloused and scarred from the fire that had changed everything. The burns on his palms had healed into shiny white lines he touched sometimes at night, reminders that pain could open eyes. But the world outside New Dawn had not changed. Letters arrived from Atlanta and Savannah, anonymous warnings, then official ones. The Georgia legislature had passed new laws tightening the noose on free Negro settlements. Bounty hunters doubled their fees. One crisp October morning, a rider galloped in at noon, dust flying, horse lathered. He carried a folded broadsheet from the Macon Telegraph. The headline screamed, "Abolitionist Madness in Georgia. Hawthorne Plantation Defies God and Law." The article named Elias, called New Dawn a den of runaways and thieves, and urged patriotic citizens to ride against it before winter. It listed names: Jonah, Isaiah, Ruth, as fugitives still owing labor. A reward of $500 was offered for each returned to rightful owners. The village gathered in the square that same afternoon. The air smelled of wood smoke and fear. Elias stood on the church steps, the broadsheet in his hand. "They are coming," he said simply. "Not tonight, maybe not next week, but they will come. We can run, we can fight, or we can stand and make them see what we have built." Isaiah spoke first, voice like gravel. "I ain't running no more. This ground got my sweat in it. My wife buried here last spring. My boy learned his letters here. They want me. They come through me." Ruth lifted her chin. "I got daughters now who never knew chains. I'll die before I let them learn." Jonah leaned on his staff, stronger than ever, the limp almost gone. "We send word north again. We tell the papers up there what's happening. We arm every man, woman, and child who can hold a gun. But most of all, we keep building. Let them ride up and see houses with glass, children in school, a mill turning. Let them see freedom working." Elias nodded. "Then we prepare." They worked through the night and the weeks that followed. Men dug a deep defensive ditch along the northern boundary and filled it with sharpened stakes hidden under brush. Women sewed cartridge bags from old feed sacks. Children learned signals. 3 owl hoots for danger, 2 for all clear. The blacksmith shop ran day and night forging pikes, repairing old muskets smuggled in by sympathetic conductors on the Underground Railroad. Elias wrote letters by candlelight to his cousin in Boston, to newspapers in New York and Philadelphia, even to a Quaker abolitionist in Pennsylvania whose name he had once cursed in private. Money grew tight again. He sold the last luxury he owned, his father's gold pocket watch, and used every cent for powder and lead. Caroline, now 12, helped melt lead into bullets at the kitchen table, her small face serious in the firelight. "Papa," she asked one night, "if they come, will they take me away too?" Elias set down the mold. "No one will ever take you, or anyone here, while I draw breath. But if the worst happens, you run to the woods with Ruth. She knows the hiding places." She nodded, brave as any soldier. The first real attack came on a rainy night in late November. They heard the horses before they saw them, 20 riders, maybe more, torches sputtering in the downpour. The dogs went mad. Lanterns flared in every cabin. Men grabbed weapons and took positions behind the new log breastworks they had built along the main road. Women and children slipped into the root cellars or the woods as planned. Elias stood at the front gate with Jonah on one side and Isaiah on the other. He carried no gun, only a lantern and the manumission papers for every soul in New Dawn, bound together with twine. The riders reined up just outside rifle range. Their leader, a thick-necked planter named Colonel Buford from the next county, raised a pistol. "Hawthorne," he bellowed through the rain, "you got 10 minutes to turn over every runaway and burn this place to the ground yourself, or we do it for you." Elias lifted the lantern higher so they could see his face. "These people are free," he called back, voice steady despite the cold water streaming down his neck. "I have signed papers for everyone. They work for wages. They own their homes. Turn around, Colonel." "There's no profit in murder tonight." Buford laughed, an ugly sound. "Profit? This is about order, about the South. You're a traitor to your race." A shot cracked from the rider's side. Warning, not aimed. It splintered wood near Elias's head. Behind him, rifles cocked. Jonah whispered, "Say the word, and we fire." Elias raised his hand. "Wait." He took 3 slow steps forward into the open, rain plastering his shirt to his chest. "I was like you once," he shouted, "blind, rich on other people's backs. Then God, or maybe just a boy's scream, showed me the truth. I cannot change the past, but I can stand here tonight and tell you this. If you ride through that gate, you will have to kill me first, and then every man, woman, and child behind me who has tasted freedom. How many of your souls are you willing to damn for cotton and pride?" Silence fell, broken only by rain and nervous horses. Some of the riders shifted uneasily. One younger man lowered his torch. Buford spat. "You always were a fool, Hawthorne." He raised his pistol again. Before he could fire, a new sound cut through the storm. Hooves, many of them, coming fast from the south. Torches appeared on the road behind the village. 20 more riders, but these carried no guns pointed at New Dawn. At their head rode a tall black man in a dark coat. Jasper, one of the first to leave New Dawn 2 years earlier. He had ridden north, found work on the railroad, and returned with friends. Free men from Atlanta and a few white Quakers who had heard the letters Elias sent. Jasper reined up beside Elias, rifle across his saddle. "Evening, Colonel," he said calmly. "We heard there was trouble. Brought some neighbors." Buford stared, face twisting with rage and disbelief. The balance had shifted. 20 against 40 now, and the rain was turning the road to mire. "You'll pay for this, Hawthorne," he snarled. "Mark my words." He wheeled his horse and led his men away at a gallop, torches bobbing into the darkness like dying stars. The village did not cheer. They simply lowered their weapons and stood in the rain, breathing hard, alive. Elias turned to Jasper. "You came back." Jasper smiled, teeth white in the lantern light. "Couldn't let the first free village in Georgia burn. Besides, I still got family here." That night they kept watch until dawn. No one slept, but when the sun rose, pale and watery, the village still stood. The witness tree, half dead, half green, seemed to stand a little straighter. Word of the standoff spread faster than any newspaper. Abolitionist papers in the North printed the story. Money and supplies began arriving by secret routes. Barrels of flour, boxes of books, even a small printing press for a village newspaper they named the Dawn Star. More runaways came, now with hope instead of desperation. Elias walked the perimeter the next morning with Jonah, checking the breastworks. "We survived one night," Jonah said quietly. "But there will be more." Elias nodded. "Then we keep building. Stronger, better, until the whole South has to look at what we made and ask itself why it waited so long." They worked on through the winter, strengthening fences, expanding the school, planting winter wheat. Caroline and the other children helped print the first issue of the Dawn Star on the new press. A single sheet with stories of freedom, recipes, Bible verses, and one line Elias wrote himself at the bottom: "Here, no one owns another. Here, we own the dawn." Spring of the 4th year brought the biggest test yet. A formal delegation arrived, not night riders this time, but the sheriff of the county with 20 deputies and a judge from Atlanta carrying a court order. The document declared New Dawn an unlawful assembly and ordered every former slave returned to rightful owners or sold at auction. Elias was to be arrested for inciting insurrection. The village gathered again in the square. This time the mood was different, steadier, prouder. They had faced guns. They had faced fire. They had faced winter. Elias stood before the judge, papers in hand. The manumission documents, the deeds to the land he had sold fairly, the wage ledgers showing every cent paid. "These people are free under the law of manumission," he said. "I have broken no statute. If you want them, you will have to take them over my dead body, and the bodies of every free man and woman here who will die defending what is theirs." The sheriff looked uncomfortable. The judge scanned the crowd. Men with rifles held loosely but ready. Women holding children but standing tall. Children who met his eyes without fear. Then Ruth stepped forward, holding the village Bible. "Judge," she said, voice clear as church bells, "you can read the law, but can you read this?" She opened to Galatians. "There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, for you are all one." The judge closed the court order slowly. He looked at Elias for a long moment. "Mr. Hawthorne," he said at last, "you have made this complicated. I will report back to Atlanta. Until then, consider yourselves under observation." The delegation rode away without arrests, without violence. That evening the village held the largest celebration yet. Music spilled from the church. Children danced around the witness tree. Elias sat on the steps of his small cabin, Caroline beside him, watching the firelight play across faces that had once known only darkness. Jonah brought him a cup of cider. "You know they'll be back with more papers, more guns." "I know," Elias said. "But every day we stand, every house we build, every child who learns to read, that's another crack in the old wall. One day the whole thing will fall." Jonah clinked his cup against Elias's. "To cracks," he said. "To dawn," Elias answered. And under the Georgia stars, New Dawn kept growing. Quietly, stubbornly, beautifully. One paid wage, one glass window, one free breath at a time. The fourth year arrived like a promise kept. Warm rains in March, cotton planting done by willing hands, the village streets now lined with blooming dogwoods that the children had transplanted from the woods. The printing press in the schoolhouse ran almost daily now, producing not just the Dawn Star but simple primers, hymn sheets, and letters to kin still held in bondage farther south. Caroline, 13, and growing into a young woman with her mother's quiet eyes, set type alongside the older girls, her fingers ink-stained and sure. Elias had aged visibly in those years. The lines around his eyes deepened from too many sleepless nights watching the horizons, but there was a lightness in his step he had never known before. He no longer lived alone in his small cabin. Jonah and his new wife, Lila, a runaway seamstress who had arrived the previous autumn, shared the loft most evenings when planning meetings ran late. The cabin had become something of a council house, its single room filled with maps, ledgers, and the low murmur of strategy. The threat from Atlanta had not vanished. The judge's observation turned into regular visits. Deputies riding the perimeter roads, taking notes, counting heads, measuring fences. Letters arrived from the state capitol demanding tax records, proof of manumission for every resident, even affidavits that no incitement to rebellion had occurred. Elias answered each one meticulously, sending copies north to abolitionist friends who published excerpts in the Liberator and Frederick Douglass paper. The publicity brought both protection and peril. Donations trickled in, bolts of cloth from Philadelphia Quakers, books from Boston Ladies' Societies, a small printing fund from New York. But it also painted a larger target on New Dawn. One humid June afternoon, a stranger rode in alone. No posse, no badges, just a lean man in a dusty coat with a carpet bag strapped behind his saddle. He asked for Elias by name and was brought to the cabin. The stranger introduced himself as Thomas Reed, a correspondent for the New York Tribune, sent south by Mr. Greeley himself after reading the smuggled letters. "I've come to see the truth of this place," Reed said, removing his hat. "And if it's what they say, the North needs to know. The whole country needs to know." Elias studied him for a long moment. "You're welcome to look, but you speak to the people yourself. No questions from me. They tell their own story." For 3 days, Reed walked the village. He sat in the schoolhouse while Caroline read aloud from McGuffey's Reader to a dozen wide-eyed children. He watched Isaiah teach apprentices how to forge horseshoes at the smithy. He ate supper with Ruth and Grace, listening to stories of children sold away, of nights hiding in swamps, of the first wage envelope that felt like freedom in paper form. He interviewed Jonah under the witness tree, pencil flying across pages as the young man spoke of the night the branch fell and the master carried him to safety instead of letting him burn. On the fourth morning, Reed sat with Elias on the cabin porch, notebook open. "This is no utopia," Reed said quietly. "There's hardship here. Lean winters, fear of raids, the constant shadow of the law. But it works. People are paid. Children learn. Families stay together. And you're the strangest part of all. A slave owner who turned his own world upside down." Elias looked out at the square where 2 boys chased a hoop, laughing. "I didn't turn it upside down. I just stopped pretending it was right side up." Reed's article appeared 3 months later, spread across 4 columns in the Tribune under the headline, "A Georgia Experiment, Freedom Paid in Wages, Not Whips." It described New Dawn in careful, vivid detail. The glass windows catching sunrise, the school bell ringing, the quiet dignity of people who had once been listed as chattel. It quoted Jonah, "We built this with our hands. No one gave it to us. We earned it." It quoted Ruth, "My grandchildren will never know what a lash sounds like." And it quoted Elias only once, "I was wrong. For 38 years I was wrong. The rest of my life is repayment." The piece ignited a firestorm. Northern papers reprinted it. Southern editors denounced it as fanatical lies and incitement. Petitions circulated in Congress calling for investigation. Abolitionist societies raised funds for New Dawn's defense. In Georgia, the governor publicly condemned Elias as a traitor to Southern institutions. Rewards for his arrest, dead or alive, began to appear on wanted posters nailed to crossroads trees. The raids grew bolder. In September, a band of 30 night riders, some local planters, some hired thugs from Alabama, struck at midnight. They came with torches and ropes, aiming to burn the schoolhouse first and drag away the ringleaders. But New Dawn was ready. Watchfires had been lit along the ridges. Signals passed from cabin to cabin. Men and women poured out armed with muskets, shotguns, and the pikes forged in Isaiah's shop. The raiders met a wall of fire, warning shots cracking over their heads, and a line of defenders 30 strong. Elias stood at the front again, lantern in one hand, manumission papers in the other. "Go home," he shouted over the hoofbeats and curses. "There's nothing here for you but graves if you press on." The riders hesitated. One young man, a planter's son no older than 20, lowered his torch and backed his horse away. Others followed. The leader cursed and fired a wild shot that buried itself in the dirt. Then they turned and fled into the dark. No one died that night, but the message was sent. Afterward, the village held no celebration. They simply cleaned weapons, repaired fences, and went back to work. The school bell rang the next morning as usual. Children filed in, slates in hand, as if nothing had happened. Winter came again, harder than before. Supplies from the north arrived sporadically, sometimes intercepted, sometimes delayed by patrols. Elias sold the last of the big house furniture to buy blankets and medicine. Caroline grew thinner, but her eyes stayed bright. She and the other girls sewed quilts from scraps, trading them in Macon for salt and flour when cash ran low. In February, word arrived by a trusted conductor. The Georgia legislature was debating a bill to declare New Dawn a public nuisance and authorize its forcible dissolution. If passed, troops would come, not just riders, but militia with cannon. The council met that night in Elias's cabin. Faces were grim around the firelight. "We can't fight an army," Isaiah said. "We can't run either," Ruth answered. "This is home." Jonah looked at Elias. "What do you say?" Elias stared into the flames for a long time. "We go north," he said at last. "Not all at once, not in panic. We send scouts ahead, find land in Ohio or Indiana where free-colored people already live. We buy what we can. We move in small groups over months. The village isn't the cabins or the mill. It's the people. We take the people north, and New Dawn goes with us." Silence followed. Then Ruth nodded slowly. "It's not surrender," she said. "It's survival, and we carry the light with us." They planned through the winter nights. Scouts left in pairs. Jonah and Lila first, then Isaiah and his family. Each group took tools, seed, books, and enough coin to start anew. Elias stayed behind with the last group, refusing to leave until every soul who wanted to go had safe passage. Caroline asked him one evening as they packed the final crates, "Will we ever come back?" Elias touched the scar on his palm. "Maybe one day, when the laws change, when the South sees what we saw. But until then, we carry New Dawn inside us." Spring of 1857 arrived soft and green. The last wagons rolled north under cover of darkness. Elias driving the lead team, Caroline beside him. The witness tree sapling wrapped in burlap in the back. Behind them, the cabin stood empty but not abandoned. Neighbors from surrounding farms had promised to watch over them until someone returned. They traveled by back roads, sleeping in barns arranged by the network, paying tolls with the last of the village funds. Along the way, they met others, runaways, free families, even a few white Southerners who had quietly turned against the system. Each meeting strengthened them. When they crossed into Ohio in late May, the land opened wide. Rolling fields, clear streams, no overseers riding the horizons. They found a valley near Oberlin where Quakers and free blacks had already settled. Land was purchased with pooled money. Cabins rose again, smaller at first, but with the same glass windows, the same gardens, the same school bell hung from a new post. They named the new place Dawn's Landing. Elias lived out his years there quietly, farming, teaching carpentry to the young men, writing letters to newspapers until his hands shook too much to hold a pen. Caroline grew into a teacher, then a lecturer who traveled north telling the story of New Dawn to anyone who would listen. Jonah became mayor of Dawn's Landing in 1865, the year the war ended and slavery died on paper. He planted a new witness tree on the village green, a sturdy oak sapling carried all the way from Georgia. Elias died in the spring of 1872, surrounded by grandchildren, black and white, who called him Grandpa Eli. His last words, whispered to Caroline, were simple. Tell them it was worth it. He was buried beneath the new witness tree, a plain stone marking the spot. Elias Hawthorne, 1834 to 1872. He saw, he changed, he paid. The village, now a small town, still stands. The school bell rings every morning. Children of every shade play in the streets. And when strangers ask where the strength of Dawn's Landing came from, the elders always answer the same way. It started with one man who finally opened his eyes, and a people who refused to let him look away. Thank you for walking this path with us through the story of Elias Hawthorne and New Dawn, a tale of awakening, atonement, and the slow, stubborn building of something better. What moved you most in this journey? Which moment lingered longest? And where are you listening from? Which city? Which country do you call home?